Stop, stop, stop. Welcome to the Hank Cisco Show. I'm John Doyle, and I'm sitting in for Hank today. Hank's feeling a little bit under the weather, and we didn't want to miss the opportunity to have this conversation we're going to have today. And so I decided to sit in for him. He asked me to take a few moments. We hope, Hank, that you're doing really well, and we're all thinking about you. But before we get Welcome to the Hank Cisco Show. I'm John Doyle, sitting in for Hank Cisco. Hank's feeling a little under the weather, and he gave me a call and asked me if I would take over for him today because the topic we're talking about is so important. And I said yes, of course, but I wanted to say we miss you, Hank, and we're hoping that you're feeling better and taking care of yourself. But now we're going to switch over to the topic at hand. Hank had this guest on, Jeanne Hoff, last year in 2013, and we wanted to bring her back because the topic that she's talking about is so important. It's about planning for the end of your life, and that may be something that's difficult for you to think about or talk about, but what we want to do is make sure you can hear how, although challenging a conversation it can be, how important a conversation it can be. So Jeanne, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're the author of a book that's called Between Now and Then, am I correct?
Yes.
And Between Now and Then is about planning for the end of your life.
Exactly.
So can you tell me before we started, you were talking a little bit about the difficulty people have talking about this issue and why it's so important. Can you share with us something about that?
Well, I directed the book mostly toward baby boomers who, if they retire at 65, could potentially have 30 years to live. So the question becomes, what are you going to do with 30 years of time? I mean, is 15 years of it will be spent in a nursing home, or 15 years spending on cruises, having a wonderful time? It could be all or both or neither. And a little bit of planning. I mean, you plan when you go to the grocery store, you make a list. If you're going on vacation, you make a list so you don't leave the house without this or that. I mean, making lists is a basic human function, if you ask me. But when it comes to end-of-life planning, people really get upset. I've done several book signings when people come up and they look at the cover of the book and they, oh yeah, that's really nice. And they see the words end-of-life planning and they throw their arms up. I mean, you would think they were auditioning for Broadway. No, I'm not going to talk about that. And I asked one lady, why is your reaction so immediate and so negative? Oh, no. And she walked away. She couldn't talk about it. And there are a lot of things to talk about, and they don't all have to be bad. It could be, gee, I always wanted to play the piano, always. And so maybe you should give yourself the opportunity to try. Maybe you'll be really bad at it. Maybe you'll be really good. Maybe you'll hate it, but you have to try. And everybody has a bucket list. So the issue, when Hank interviewed me the last time, he held the book up. He was really very dramatic. This book is not about dying. This book is about life. And that's what I want people to understand. It's your life. And you have days and years between now and then. And make it your choice. Choose what you want to do with your time.
So what we want people to do is not be thinking about the fact that this book is talking about death, because
No,
it's
this
not.
is not about death
The
and
book is
dying.
really about that time of life between now and when that moment
Yes.
happens, and how to prepare. And certainly the consequences in that preparation go far beyond you, because there's family, friends, there's all sorts of people who end up being affected by the decisions that you make.
True. The title came from a conversation I had with a man I worked for years ago. And it was very casual. All he said was, I'm not afraid of dying, but I am afraid of what's between now and then. And that's something to be afraid of when you think about it. But that was long before all this extreme medical situation became very commonplace. And when it came time to come up with the title for the book, this just popped into my head.
Right.
And it seems to work.
So what you suggest first is that someone should take time to think about what they're doing. Talk to me about that process. What is it you're looking for someone to do as they think about that?
Well, let's just start with the 5 chapters of my book. There's
Sure.
legal, financial, funeral and burial, record keeping, and personal. And each one of them can address the question, what do you plan to do between now and then? So let's start with legal. There are documents that you should have prepared in a timely fashion by an estate planning lawyer. Any regular lawyer can do it, but I don't recommend that you do that. I think it's too important. And find yourself an experienced estate planning lawyer. Ask your friends, ask around, call the Bar Association. And understand the documents. Don't just sign them, because I've seen this so many times. People will sign, 9 documents in all these places and all these notaries, and then the lawyer will say, now, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, do you understand these documents? And they'll say yes, but you know they don't. And I recommend in this book, ask all these. This book is like a textbook. It will give you all the questions to ask of the lawyer before the wills are prepared, before the documents, so that you know what you're signing. So that's the first person.
So what are some of the documents we're talking about then?
Let's say for a married couple, 2 wills,
Okay.
2 living wills,
Okay.
2 healthcare powers of attorney, and a durable power of attorney. You can also have a revocable living trust if you choose, if the lawyer recommends that. The will is important because it enables you to choose who will be your executor. It will take your estate through probate, which is not, some people talk about probate like it's the plague. It's just a legal process. It's not a big deal, in my opinion. I've done the work of probate for lots of years. It gives you choices if you have a will. If you don't, the state has a list of who gets what, and it's in the law books. It will be how it is, whether you like it or not. The living will is more important than a will, because the will doesn't take over till after you're dead.
Right.
The living will is while you're still alive. When you make choices about who will speak for you when you can no longer speak for yourself, that's the most critical element of a living will. You must choose the person in your life who will stand up to your family and to the medical profession and say, this person lying in this bed does not want this kind of treatment. And that's why the person has to be very strong and understand that the decisions are not theirs, they're yours. You made the decision, but you can't speak anymore. This person will have to speak for you.
And so that person's essentially acting as your intermediary. And when
Exactly.
you're talking about treatment, you're not suggesting that to avoid bad treatment, but actually like the kind of medical treatment you might give someone at the end of life, some kind of emergency kind of extreme procedure.
Heroic measures and all that stuff, where everybody says, oh, I want everything done, I want to be kept alive at all costs. Well, I'm not sure if you knew what that meant, you would say that. So it's something to investigate. And don't make your choices frivolously. Do the research. Ask your doctor. Make them answer your questions. Look up everything online that you can think of that will give you comfort in signing that document. As far as funeral and burial, I think it's important that you express what you want and what you don't want. So many men say, just put me out in the trash bag on Tuesdays.
Right.
That's very disrespectful of your family, in my opinion. But there seems to be a trend toward cremation. I have no objection as far as, this is your life. This is also your death. We want death with dignity, death with respect. If you want a funeral service in church, tell your family what you want. If you don't want that, tell them that too. The way people are doing this, avoiding end-of-life conversations, is assuming that your family are mind readers. They're not. You need to coach them along, tell them, have a family meeting if you think you can manage it. Write it down. That's probably the best thing. Write down what you want, what you don't, sign your name and date it, and make copies for other people so that you're not just holding this to yourself. All these documents need to be found someday. So someone in your life, whether it's your spouse or your children, your one child, your executor, needs to know where to find these documents.
And so it's not that old cliche we'd see in a movie from the 1940s where people were discovering what's in the will at the last minute. We're much more interested in people knowing what's there so that they can be prepared to make decisions about that. That's great. And from the perspective of all of these documents, you want to be organized. Can you talk a little bit to me about record keeping and why that's important?
I've been asked why record keeping deserves an entire chapter of the book. And I did the work of probate with executors, working for lawyers for many, many years. And you'd be amazed how many times an executor will come into the office with a big cardboard box. And they'll say, Grandmom died last month, and we found all these papers in her house, and we don't know what to do with any of this stuff. And they give it to me. And it's work that I love. It's organizing and getting things straight and filing and all that stuff. But that executor doesn't have a clue. And so when your paperwork is a mess and you take it into a lawyer in a box, you're going to pay by the hour to have it sorted out. Now, when the secretary or the paralegal does it, you don't pay as much as when the lawyer does it. But if you keep your files organized, not fancy, just simple, A to Z, in a safe place that will protect it from fire or water damage. I don't recommend bank safe deposit boxes necessarily because they're not always accessible.
Right.
But just have somebody know where you keep these it's the original documents that are important, the deeds, the titles to your car, bank accounts, investment accounts, all this stuff needs to be protected so that when you die, somebody can deal with it. And every year the Inquirer lists this, it's called unclaimed property. Millions and millions of dollars of unclaimed property because of this lack of record keeping. And the state doesn't want it. The state goes out of its way to find the owners of that. And that's part of the reason for that article in the paper.
So what we're looking at then is someone should have some kind of place that they can keep that's both safe from physical damage and also is organized in a way people can figure out what's there. And they're looking at documents that talk about their property and about the way things of their property should be treated. But what other documents should they make sure is in there? So we have, deed and car and those type of things and financial planning documents. What other
all their legal documents, divorce records.
Okay.
If the children's birth certificates, death certificates of their parents, and I'm trying to think what else. All your bank account records, and your executor is basically in a position to have to close down your life. Okay. All of your accounts. If you have a regular exterminator who comes to your house, somebody has to call him and say, "Gee, don't bother to come anymore." And everybody who services your life and all your doctors, all your information, that's another important aspect of record keeping is the names of all the doctors and all your medical prescriptions, your lawyers, your accountant, your insurance agent. And I have in the last page in the funeral chapter here, I have a document called People to Call. I know lawyers who use this in their practice. All it is a list, a chart with a couple columns. These are the people I want you to call if I'm ever seriously ill or seriously injured in an accident or when I die. And I came up with this idea for two reasons. When my mother died, I had her little A to Z book. It was cross outs and X's and all this. I did the best I could to call everybody, but I'm sure I missed a few people. Years later, the husband of a friend of mine died. And his best friend was an uncle of mine. They had been best men in each other's weddings, and they were active in a lot of organizations. But my uncle didn't show up at the funeral because nobody called him. Right. And the wife was furious for years because he didn't come. So we have upsets at both ends of this telephone conversation that never happened. So this is just a list. These are the people I want you to call. And add people, I recommend don't necessarily delete people. I mean, keep their name on the list unless there's a good reason to cross them off. And update the list periodically and keep it safe. But don't keep it on your computer. Keep it on paper so that somebody can come in your house and pick it up and start making phone calls.
And that's one of the things, too. We live in such a digital culture right now that you're talking really about the need to have this stuff in a physical form somewhere.
Absolutely.
So it can be
On
easily
paper,
accessed.
yes.
That it's fine to have records on a computer, but the physical forms are what the executor is going to need. And if you don't have them organized, you're really suggesting that there'll be legal bills from people trying to work through that. That's a burden on the family after your passing.
What it does is it'll diminish the amount of money that your family can get because the money to pay for your estate administration comes off the top.
Okay.
Along with the taxes.
All right, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about funeral and burial then. Just we sort of touched on that. I think in some ways that may be the topic that's the scariest for people when we start to have this conversation, right? And maybe one of the things that warns people off. And so if we sort of get some words out about that, what kind of thinking or planning do we need to be doing for that?
I think the most important thing is to understand, I mean, really get it, that you're going to die. I know, I mean, everything that's born will live and it will die. You don't know how long it's going to take, but that is the way of the universe. So to deny it and pretend it isn't going to happen won't help you or your family ultimately.
Right.
So the first thing to do is acknowledge it and then deal with the questions. What do you want to do between now and then? And one of the things I recommend is you look into funeral planning. If you die suddenly and your spouse or your children have to shop around for a burial ground, spend all that money, arrange a funeral, make all those arrangements in short notice, what do you get, 3 days maybe? Usually too much money is spent. So if you do your own investigation, I recommend you go around and check out cemeteries. Find the place where you want to spend eternity. Go talk to the cemetery owners, talk to funeral directors, ask them what everything costs. Look at your choices. Do you want a gorgeous black and gold casket with satin lining or something, or you don't want any of that stuff? So the idea is to investigate it and then make your own choices and write it down. Tell your family. Talk to them when you have dinner or something, and your kids will say, "Oh, Daddy, I don't want to talk about that now. We'll talk about that later." Well, when is later? When the poor man gets hit by a bus? I mean, these things happen. And so to be prepared is not only going to save the survivors a lot of anguish, but a lot of money.
And I think your point about the emotional stress at that time is really important because
Often.
right now not talking about it relieves me of a very little bit of emotional stress. But at the end of life, when I'm dealing with a sudden death or even a death from a long-term illness and we haven't dealt with it really, that emotional stress is layered on top of the damage and fear and those stresses around finances. I mean, the money coming in from insurance or the money coming in from a pension or whatever money may be coming needs to be dealt with in a reasonable way, and emotions get in the way of that. So I can imagine just how important all of this pre-planning is. It really does seem to make a difference.
The funeral director will want to know very quickly in the conversation, where is the money going to come from? You cannot operate a funeral business and get paid later.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the idea is if you have some kind of money designated for your funeral and burial, somebody in your family needs to know about it. It can be a life insurance policy payable to the funeral home. I'm not sure I necessarily recommend that.
Okay.
It could be a life insurance policy payable to one of your children. But under the law, that policy is payable to that child. They're under no obligation to use that money for your funeral. So if you want that money designated for your funeral, you have to tell the child. Other than that, the insurance company will pay the beneficiary, whoever you name.
And so what you're suggesting is that all of this information isn't just about saying who gets what, but it's even saying, I want to protect you by saying you should do this or you should use it. In the same way that living will, in a way, and what the an advance directive, those kind of things are all about helping relieve emotional stress from a person in that final crisis. You're standing around a bed in a hospital and something's happening and you need to make a decision quickly, and you at least know the will, the desire of that person who's in the bed.
part of the what I see end of life planning is to avoid regrets and the feelings that I should have done more. I made a mistake. I made a bad choice. I feel guilty. If the conversations are out in the open and honest and shared, when the person passes away, you'll feel better about it. Now, you're not going to be happy about it, of course, but you'll know that you did what they wanted, that you spoke your truth, they spoke their truth, and it's a passing that is a blessing for some people. But other than that, there's anguish and there's guilt and there's fighting. You have no idea how people fight over living wills. It gets really nasty. People are threatening to sue the doctors and to sue the brothers, everybody. If you keep out of court, you'll be much happier.
Right, that's right, and it'll help the family afterwards for sure, and things will get where you want them to. Can you talk to me a little bit about this idea of choosing an executor?
Right.
What should we be looking for? And you also used the term here in the notes I have of an alternate executor. But before we do that, what is the idea of how should I go about choosing an executor?
Some women in particular want to name their firstborn son to be their executor because he's the firstborn son, for no other reason. Let's say that he's been in bankruptcy twice, he doesn't pay his child support, he's not well employed. Is this the person you want handling your money at the end? And the women will say, well, he'll be working with a lawyer and the lawyer will take charge of everything. There's an element of truth to that. But an executor being appointed an executor is not an honor. It's a job. Okay. I've done it. You have to allow 2 years of your life. It shouldn't take that long, but it could. If you have a house to sell and empty and all these things you have to try and find and there's no clues where it is, you need a person who will stick with that process for 2 years and be coachable by the attorneys. This is what you need to do. This is what you should not do. So you want to pick a person who you know can handle it, you trust implicitly to do what you want done. And this is the same thing with a living will. You need to trust that person. And the alternate is very important because what if your executor is unavailable to act for any reason? Say they're not well, or they're living on the West Coast then, or they travel a lot for their job, or just any reason at all. You want to have a backup. The first person can renounce. It's a simple process in the courthouse. Okay. And then the second one kicks in. But if you don't have a backup, the court will appoint someone. And it could turn out to be someone you would never have appointed on your own. The sister-in-law you don't like, the relative who's after your money. I mean, you want to make sure that these are people that you trust and that they will work well together.
That's great. Yeah, that's really interesting to me. So there's another thing, too, we talk about with the main will here, and that's the idea of the little things. So we've talked about these sort of major issues. So things about your large-scale finances in your life that you need to arrange, and about a house or whatever those items are. But people have private things in their lives, too, that in many ways, again, the traditional trope of what a will is it's giving, little things to little people. How do you think people should approach that part of their material goods with a family or with friends?
You're talking about their stuff.
Their stuff, yeah, exactly.
One of the things you can do is begin to give your things away as gifts, like at Christmas time. Take your most cherished piece of cut glass and give it to your granddaughter. If you have a doll collection or something, maybe a grandchild will want it, maybe they won't. If there's something that one of your children or grandchildren has expressed a desire that they love it or they'd like to have it someday, give it to them now. Or put a piece of masking tape underneath and say, under my will, well, when I die, this is to go to my granddaughter, Bonnie, okay? Mm-hmm. So that, and then your executor needs to know that these things are so marked. The other thing you can do is write a list that's separate from your will. You give it to your executor and you list all your special things that you want to go to some, like my wedding dress, I want to give to so, okay. All these things, you list them. You sign the list and you date it. And you give it to your executor and you keep it with your will. But you do not list these items in the will. And the reason is, you may not even own them when you die.
I see.
You may have given them to a thrift store. They had a fire and everything got burned up. I mean, you don't want to document them in a piece of paper as serious as a will. Also, if you itemize every one of these things, when you die, they will have to be appraised. And appraisals cost money, part of the estate administration. And based upon the list of the appraiser of the value on the date of your death, they will be taxed for inheritance tax. You don't want that.
Right.
And like I said, chances are you may not even own that stuff when you die. So you don't want to put that in your will. I could tell you a story about that. Many years ago, a lady wanted her will to list all her cherished possessions. I want my collection of ceramic birds to go to so-and-so. I want my china to go to so-and-so, my emerald ring. The list was very, very long. And she had given it to the lawyer, and he sent her a draft of the will, and she came back. She said, no, you have it all wrong. We have to do it again. So he did it again, and he still got it wrong. So he sent me to her house. He said, would you please sit down with this woman and itemize everything? Do you know there wasn't a thing there that had any value at all? Okay. It was stuff that came from the dollar store, or I don't know, it looked like she had won it on the boardwalk. I mean, it was nothing of value. But she insisted that it be listed on her will against her lawyer's advice, which meant that when she died, somebody had to appraise it, which cost money, but they had to find out that everything was worth zero. Now that's a shame.
Right, and so there was a giant expense on the appraisal for materials that didn't have any
Not
value.
everybody takes their lawyer's advice.
Right, so by doing it on a non-legal document, you avoid that,
Yes.
But you still can help things be distributed, and certainly thinking about giving people things that you don't need, right? Your stuff accumulates, and as you get older, you may not need that gorgeous cut glass bowl anymore. You may not have a use for that.
Right.
And someone else may be able to take some time with that and use it. That's really fascinating. So we've talked a lot now about that end of life stuff that may be scaring people, but there's other things that are part of this planning from now till then. And you talked to me earlier a little bit about sort of knowing about making decisions about nursing home, or knowing something, making decisions about even the way you want to live the rest of your life. That's part of this conversation too. Am I correct about that?
Yes. For a married couple in particular to make a decision to go to a CCRC, that's called Continuing Care Retirement Community, Meadowood, Shenandoah, Normandy, all the ACTS communities, they are CCRCs. They're expensive, but you will get very good care there. You'll get good food, and in most cases, there's some kind of a health facility on the premises. Whether you pay for it in advance or as needed is to be determined, but it's there. One of the things baby boomers have done is move to the 55 plus communities. There's no such healthcare thing. If you move in at 67 and now you're 74 and one of you dies or you're very unhealthy, there's nobody there to help you. It's another neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood that's almost like a 55 plus, but it isn't. Right. It's just everybody's that age. But the decision has to be, in my opinion, made equally between the spouses, because if you push one person into it, there's going to be resentment, but sometimes you have to push. I know a situation where a couple the husband wanted to move to a retirement community 7 years ago when the real estate market was up. He knew he could sell his house and have the money to buy into it. But now the real estate market's down. He doesn't have the money. His wife didn't want to go. She was afraid of all the what ifs. What if I don't like it? What if the food isn't any good? What if the people don't like me? What if I want to move back to my house? And so she complained enough that he said, okay, we're not going to do it. And now she's in a nursing home. He's living in the house and paying out thousands of dollars a month to care for her, when it could have been all handled if she just got out of her own way a little bit. It's not easy. I am not here to tell you it's an easy choice, but sometimes it's the only one that's reasonable.
Yeah, we're running out of time right now, and I'd want to say a couple things and then give you a few moments to just sort of close us out. And to say, one of the things I think, and Hank said this the first time he had you on, this book isn't about death and dying and funerals, it's really about life. And it's life, it seems to me, it's the life of the person who's planning as well as the life of those around you. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you really care about the people around you, you want to take the time to make some planning. And your book seems to be a guide that can help me as an individual talk with the people around me to make those decisions instead of trying to go it alone.
Yes.
You talked about that hard conversation at the table between father and child. and that if that book is sitting next to them and they've taken time to read through it, that conversation now has some way to be supported. And so on that note, I just want to make sure that people know that the book's available, right? People can purchase it, and how could they go about getting that?
The book's available on Amazon. It's available on barnesandnoble.com also.
Great.
It can be ordered from the publisher, and the publisher is Buy Books on the Web. You can just use the initials .com.
Right, so it's bbotw.com,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yes.
And then in addition, though, you also are available to speak. So you could take this conversation we have and bring it to someplace else to talk. So, what's one of those events look like? Like, what would you be willing to do in a conversation like
Well,
that?
I can do. I've done shorter ones that are about 30 minutes, that are from, let's just say a Lions Club or something. They asked me to come and talk about this. This is 450 pages. It's hard to talk into 30 minutes.
Right.
But the other one is I did some series, 5 chapters at a library, the William Jeanne's library, that were based on the 5 chapters of the book, which enabled the people attending and I to talk about all these things at length. They could come, week 1, see what's going on. Week 2, bring questions. Week 3, bring more questions. Keep the conversation going. To cover as much as we could possibly cover. So I can do it short term, 1 session, 2 sessions, 5 sessions. I'm very flexible about it because not everybody has 5 sessions.
Right, absolutely. So people can contact you by email, or I know that number and information's been scrolling underneath for most of the show. Jeanne, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. This has been spectacular, really interesting, challenging material, but really lovely for you to spend the time talking with us. I want to say thank you to Jeanne for coming on the Hank Cisco Show and for talking about this really interesting book, Between Now and Then, which helps you sort of plan for your life from now until the end of life. And it's not about that moment of death as much as it is about the living process in between. And I hope you'll pick it up. I hope you learned something today, and I hope certainly to see you again. I know you have a quote here. You want to share one of these quotes with us before we close up, and then we'll say goodbye.
Dr. Phil has a quote that says, "Any feelings of anxiety you may have talking about things now are tiny compared to the feelings of regret you will have if you don't."
And we know that Hank Cisco doesn't have any problem talking about anything whenever he wants. And so what I want to say again is thank you so much for being here. And thank you for joining us. It's been a great episode today. And next week there'll be another Hank Cisco show. And hopefully Hank will be sitting right here in this seat. And I'll be back in the tech half of the show. So thanks and have a great day. Bye-bye.